I'm going to hand over to Maura for the roll call.
Thank you, Chair. You're hereby summoned to attend the special meeting of the Planning Committee on the 29th of July 2020. Councillor Jason Barr, Councillor John Boyle, Alderman Alan Breslin, Councillor Angela Dobbins, Councillor Paul Gallagher, Councillor Sean Harkin, Councillor Christopher Jackson, Councillor Dan Kelly, Alderman Keith Kerrigan, Alderman Hilary McClintock, Councillor Ciaran Maguire, Councillor Philip McKinney, Councillor Aileen Mellon, Councillor Sean Mooney, and Councillor Sean Harkins just arrived. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Maura. Members, I've got a couple of items and on Chairperson's business. First one's relating to an decision that was taken by this committee earlier on in the month, and Maura just wants to give a brief update on it.
Thank you, Chair. Members, you'll recall at the Planning Committee, the previous Planning Committee, we dealt with an application in regard to 6A Northland Road. It was the retention of a change use from rental accommodation to B&B in retrospective works to facilitate the B&B. The application was recommended for refusal. Members of the committee overturned that decision, and as a result of that particular occasion, there was a need for us to notify the department because of the statutory consultee HED comments. However, in the meantime, the applicant and agent have supplied the information that was outstanding, and in a positive light, they have been engaging with NED. So it's just to update the committee. We haven't done the statutory notification procedure at the moment because we're hoping that that will resolve itself, and we just wanted to update members that that's the position. Should that be resolved, then we'll potentially deal with that application as it stands. However, if it isn't resolved, we will do the formal process. Is that okay, Chair?
Right. Councillor Boyle, do you have a question?
No question. Well, obviously, I welcome some degree of progress in that particular application, Chairman. Chairman, I was actually thinking about it afterwards, and clearly, a number of members had enunciated concerns around the approach of HED, and perhaps there's may well be a communication issue between themselves and ourselves as elected representatives. And Chair, I think it would be useful to invite a representative of HED to come and present to this committee and how it is that they go about determining the decisions that they come to. I think it would prove useful for us as members primarily, and so therefore that I propose that we do that, Chair.
I would agree with that proposal. I think it would be particularly useful. There has been, I suppose, issues with HED in recent times, and it would be good to get a better understanding from this committee around the process of HED and I suppose the significance that we place in historic buildings within our city and district. I think it would be good to see have a better understanding of members of this committee of the workings of HED. So I think that would be useful. Another item that, or another issue I want to bring on the chairperson's business is the late information that's been provided. Members, there's two applications in front of us today, but there is a substantial amount of late information. I trust that members took the opportunity last night to read through and familiarise yourself with the data information, but I will allow the appropriate time before each of the applications are presented for members to skim through it. But I hope that people have took the opportunity to read the most of it last night. But I just want to bring Maura and just to go through the different items of that information.
Thank you, Chair. In regard to item 1, we have the speaking notes and briefing notes supplied by the applicant. We've also had a late photograph submitted this morning as well. You should have that in your packs also. In regard to item 2, we have a letter of support from MLA and councillors dated the 22nd of July. We also have notes supplied by the agent, and they were supplied on the 27th of July. You should have all of those in your pack, and as the Chair has indicated, apart from the item this morning in regards to the photograph, all the rest of the items were sent yesterday, and hopefully members have had a good opportunity to consider those in the pack. Thank you.
Thank you, Maura. And finally, members, I want to welcome everybody here, everybody who's here in attendance in the public gallery. And while welcoming you all here, I want to remind members that first and foremost that this meeting is being recorded. It is being broadcast live. And can I ask members to be, whenever they're making contributions to the meeting, can you keep your points short and to the point and relevant to planning policy? I'm going to move on now to the planning applications list with the recommendations for decision. And before I do that, our first application is LA 11 2019 0329. It's a housing development on the Springtown Road.
Chairman,
Yeah,
Chairman, I declare an interest in that one.
apologies, I'm going to come on get that. That application was subject to a predetermination hearing. It's only those that were present in the predetermination hearing that are able to take part in the discussion and be present and vote. So can I ask anybody who wasn't part of the predetermination hearing, can they leave the chamber? We don't need to leave the chamber. You can remain in the chamber, but you can't take
Do we
part.
have the list of who was there? That's possible.
Well, we'll ask for that list to be read out now.
Chair, are they not allowed to ask probing questions and stuff under the protocol? Yeah.
Okay, well, we can ask questions and we can you can't vote. Can we read out the list of attendees of the predetermination here?
Yes, through the Chair. The predetermination hearing was held on Thursday the 12th of March. Members in attendance at the meeting included Councillor Jackson, Councillor Boyle, Alderman McClintock, Councillor Maguire, Councillor McKinney, Councillor Kelly, Councillor Durkin, Councillor Barr, Councillor Lowe, Councillor Harkin and Councillor Kerrigan. Thank you.
So members, based on that, we've 7 members that are eligible to vote on this application, so we're quorate. Can I remind members that to be able to vote on the application, you have to be present for the entirety, so nobody can leave the room, or we can't take a decision. And members, again, just remind members that the meeting is being broadcast live to the internet. So anything when you're making a contribution to the meeting, your images will be recorded. They will be available for repeated viewing. and those that might infringe on your human and data protection rights. So I'm going to, Maura, do you want to come in and provide clarity on a few issues before I ask Sarah to present the presentation?
Thank you, Chair. In regard to these, we have two strategic applications before members today. I just want to remind members, in terms of dealing with these types of cases, we've dealt with them before. It's just be mindful in terms of your options when considering the discussion and the debate in regard to proposals and potentially, how they might want to deal with the outcome of the proposal. In particular, if members are mindful to maybe overturn the officer's recommendation, we have obviously in both occasions a number of reasons for refusal. And in this case, I'm talking about item 1. If members may find that there are some other reasons for refusal that are potentially resolvable and can be dealt with at a later date, then clearly as we've done before, the principle of the matter can be discussed and agreed, and thereby afterwards those other technical issues, the applicant or agent has an opportunity to overcome them. And if not, if those issues aren't overcome, then they can be brought back to committee. It's just to be mindful of that before we begin. And this is mostly probably for new members, because previous members of the committee will be aware that that's a way of operating in terms of the proposals. So it's just because these are strategic applications, some members may not have been mindful that's how we dealt with them previously. Thank you.
Okay, and members, just again, before Sarah comes in, remind members that we have discussed this application at length at a predetermination hearing. So I'm hoping that members, when they come, that we don't have to rehearse a lot of what was discussed at the predetermination hearing before we come to a decision. But I'm going to pass over to Sarah now to present the application.
Okay, members, item 1 is LA 11 2019 03290. This is an outline application for the construction of social and affordable residential development and community centre, with works to include a new access to Springtown Road, upgrades to Springtown Road at the junction of Hawthorne Drive to include 2 right-hand turning lanes, part culverting of an existing watercourse, demolition of existing building, development of associated communal amenity spaces and landscaping, and associated site works, road and car parking. The site is located at lands between number 44 Derrymore and 42 Springtown Road, and to the west of St Ethna's Park. The recommendation is to refuse. So the application was deferred at the site at a meeting on the 8th of January for a site visit. Members carried out a site visit on the 16th of January 2020, and the details of which are set out in the report. The application was then deferred at the Planning Committee meeting on the 5th of February 2020 for a predetermination hearing. The predetermination hearing was held on Thursday the 12th of March, and the details of those members in attendance is also set out in the report. Following the predetermination hearing, the applicant by email on the 26th of May submitted 2 documents, one titled a discussion note on the issues that arose in the predetermination hearing and a transcript of the predetermination hearing. These have both been appended to the report and in members' packs. Members will also have had the opportunity to consider the late item for today's meeting. So this is the site location plan and aerial photograph of the site. The site is located on Springtown Road and comprises of 5 agricultural fields and a small agricultural building. It is 9.89 hectares in size and located outside the development limits of Derry as defined in the Derry Area Plan 2011. The site is therefore located in the countryside. The aerial photograph indicates the site outlined in red, and the blue line on the photograph is the defined limits of development as defined in the area plan. So this is just a photograph of the application sites showing the 5 agricultural fields, and internal boundaries of the field boundaries are defined by hedgerows and vegetation, and a watercourse also traverses the site. This is the site frontage along Springtown Road. Significant road infrastructure works and services would be required to upgrade the road and access to provide for the development. 2 buildings would have to be demolished to provide for adequate visibility displays and a safe access onto the site, and I will discuss this issue later in the presentation. In terms of planning history, in 2018, officers provided pad advice to the agent, and the agent was advised that the principle of the development is not acceptable as the proposal is for a major housing development outside the limits of development. The proposal would be contrary to the Derry Area Plan 2011 and would be a significant departure from the area plan. It would be contrary to the planning policy SPPS, and there was no exception under PPS 21. The agents were advised during the PAD that the fundamental principle of housing on the site is not acceptable outside the limits, and the proper procedure for this land potentially being considered to be included within the limit would be through representations in the LDP process. It is also important to note that an application for 83 social housing dwellings was refused permission in May 2009 and is located directly opposite the site, and was refused also as this was contrary to the area plan. Contrary to officers' recommendation, members approved 53 dwellings outside the settlement limit in November 2016 under application A 2015-0187. This site has been constructed and is now known as Derrymore. At that time, it was considered as rounding off and approved subject to a substantial buffer of landscaping being provided at the newly defined age of the development. Following officer site visit, this landscape buffer to the countryside has not been implemented. In terms of representations, 4 objections and 1 non-committal correspondence letter was received. And to summarise the issues raised, the objectors considered that the proposal was not on zoned housing land, and it would only be appropriate to develop housing on brownfield or zoned housing land before considering a development of this scale on the countryside. Contrary to policies PPS 21, as it does not meet the policy exceptions in CTY 5, the proposal would have an impact on the rural setting. It would be inappropriate, unobtrusive development. It does not conserve the landscape and natural resources. It impacts on privacy on dwellings at St. Denis Park. Land drainage, sewer capacity and inadequate utilities and flooding. Impacts on bats and natural habitats. Inconsistencies in the plans. And Springtown Road was considered inadequate for additional traffic and safety concerns. Neighbour notification procedures were queried, and antisocial behaviour was also raised as an issue, and a detailed consideration of the objections and officers' consideration is set out in the members' report. So this is the proposed concept layout indicating 258 dwellings in open space, and the concept indicates that it would comprise of 34 apartments, complex needs units and 2-storey dwellings with 2 areas of public open space and a community building. Supporting information was submitted along with the application, and in the supporting information it was considered that there were limited development opportunities for social housing, a lack of alternative sites and land not available on the open market. The statement submitted acknowledges that this proposal is contrary to the Derry Area Plan, the SPPS and PPS 21. It states the proposal will deliver community benefits and social and affordable housing. In the health and wellbeing strategy submitted, it stated the proposal would provide a community hub, outdoor gym and trim trail, outdoor theatre and venue area and landscaping. Alternative sites were considered in the environmental statement, which included lands at Hitch 2, Hitch 3, Hitch 1A and Hitch 15 zoned housing lands, and lands at Limavady Road and Foyle Road. However, the information submitted failed to consider other alternative sites which would be available, including Hitch 1B lands, which was approved for 1,500 houses in the west bank of the city. So in terms of the assessment of policy, the proposal is contrary to the Derry Area Plan 2011. The site is outside the development limits and is located in the countryside and would be detrimental to rural character. It is contrary to the regional development strategy in that it does not promote a drive to provide more housing in existing urban areas or compact urban forms. It is contrary to the SPPS in that it does not manage housing growth in a sustainable way as the site is outside the development plan limits. The SPPS advises a development that conflicts with the development plan should be refused unless other material considerations indicate otherwise. It is contrary to the SPPS and PPS 12 in that it undermines sustainable forms of development. The site is not in a sustainable location or integrated with employment, services, infrastructure, or public transport. It is contrary to the SPPS and PPS 13 in that it does not take full advantage of locational accessibility. Having to provide significant infrastructure and other services is not sustainable development. The proposal is contrary to the SPPS and PPS 21 in that it does not meet the exceptions test, and there are no overriding reasons that this development could not be located in the settlement limit. It is contrary to PPS 21 in that it would create urban sprawl, will damage the rural character. Extending the limit for the second time is unacceptable and contrary to all policies and does not meet any policy test within PPS 21. Additionally, the proposal is contrary to PPS 3 in that a satisfactory access from Springtown Road has not been demonstrated on the plans. It is also contrary to PPS 7 in that the works required to provide the access and visibility displays will have a detrimental impact on existing residential amenity and safety and the design quality of properties at 44 to 50 Derrymore. So this is just an extract from the Derry Area Plan which shows you the site's location, and the black line defines the development limits. So you can see the site is located outside the limit. So the application site is adjacent to Sheriff's Glen. 53 dwellings were approved by committee in November 2016 against offer's recommendation, as the proposal was also outside the limits. This major application for 258 dwellings submitted by the same applicant on land adjacent to Derrymore would again extend the age and limit for the second time from that as defined in the defined limits in the Derry Area Plan. It is an unacceptable urban development of 258 houses in the countryside. The proposal is a fundamental departure from the area plan and would again set an undesirable precedent for similar development outside the defined limits and onto the protected countryside. So this is just an extract of the city map from the area plan which shows all the zoned housing lands. So officers would advise members that there is a surplus amount of available zoned land not yet developed within the limits, and in particular the west bank of the city. The local development plan team advises in the Housing Monitor Report 2017 that there is land available for 10,000 houses in the city limits. Hitch 2 received outline permission on Buncrana Road and was granted in 2017. The Hitch 2 zoning could accommodate up to 3,500 houses and is located in an area of housing need in an accessible location in the West Bank, which would adequately accommodate this proposal for 258 dwelling units. Additionally, as part of the Section 76 legal agreement for Hitch 2, an obligation was provided to allow for up to 30% of the site for social housing. There is other available lands at Hitch 3 and lands at Craigan, and part of this zoning remains undeveloped as in an accessible location and within an area of housing need. The Hitch 1A zoned housing lands, no application or approval has been received in these lands. This location is accessible from Buncrana Road and located within the West Bank in an area of housing need. And Hitch 1B received outline permission, which was granted for approximately 1,500 houses. This also is in the West Bank in an accessible location and in an area of housing need. Council's LDP team advised that there is available land to accommodate up to 10,000 houses within the limits, and this does not include brownfield or windfall sites. Other sites are available which were not considered as part of the supporting information, such as that of Hitch 1B. The health and wellbeing strategy submitted does not outweigh the fundamental fact that this major housing development is located outside the settlement limit and contrary to the Derry Area Plan, the SPPS and other policies. Sustainable development is at the heart of the SPPS. It is expected that all layouts should be designed to achieve improved health and wellbeing in any development proposal. This is not a site-specific argument to bear determining weight to allow a major housing development in the countryside or to overcome regional and strategic material planning policy. The Northern Ireland House Executive supported the general need for social housing in the West Bank, but this does not outweigh the policy constraints for this major development of 258 units in the countryside. There is ample supply of land within the limits, and particularly within the West Bank, which could accommodate this development in a more sustainable manner. So in terms of other policy consideration, the slide above just shows the works required to provide the access. The access is located a 15-metre stagger from Hawthorne Grove. The proposal requires splays of 4.5 by 90 metres, provision of a ghost island and right-hand turning lanes, and also requires setback of the boundary by 3 metres to provide a cycle network. However, amendments to the existing traffic calming have not yet been agreed with DFI roads. The crossing island has to be widened to 2 metres for safety and convenience of non-motorised users, and this would need to be demonstrated on a plan which has not yet been provided. To provide the visibility displays, this requires demolition of 2 buildings and the existing boundary walls of properties at 44 to 50 Derrymore to be removed to accommodate displays. There may not be sufficient space between the rear of displays at the front of the existing properties, and it has not been demonstrated on the plans if this is practicable or deliverable. Officers are concerned that this would pose a safety risk to existing residents. It would be detrimental and have a detrimental impact on the design quality, with the loss of front gardens and boundary walls to those properties at 44 to 50 Derrymore, and therefore is also contrary to PPS 7. With regard to the internal layout, whilst this is an outline application and the applicant has provided a bus lay-by within the site, DFI roads have advised that major amendments would be required to the internal layout to accommodate the public transport. Additionally, members should be advised that a Section 76 legal agreement may be required to provide the bus service to the site. So just to summarise the key issues, this major housing development is outside the development limits and located in the countryside. It is therefore contrary to the Derry Area Plan, Regional and Strategic Policy and Planning Policy. This major development of 258 units outside the development limits in the countryside would set an undesirable precedent for other development outside the limits. Regard has been given to the Derry Area Plan and any determination made in accordance with the plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. However, officers do not consider that the other material considerations of this proposal indicate otherwise. The recommendation is to refuse, and there are 9 reasons for refusal which are set out in members' packs, and they're also on the screen above. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Before I invite the applicant up, can I invite Johnny to come up and address the committee? And Johnny wants to make a few points specifically in relation to the LDP. Johnny, apologies, there's some members who are having difficulty hearing.
Thank you, members. That's better now. On behalf of the LDP team, I just want to sort of reiterate succinctly and briefly what Sarah has said in terms of our thoughts and make 2 of our pressing points in relation to the emerging LDP. The first is that the proposal as presented clearly sits outside the settlement development limit, and we are also concerned about the precedent that it could set. The very reason of the SDL, of settlement development limit, is to define those sustainable parameters within which we have the responsibility for the orderly and consistent development of land. And the RDS looks for us to put 60% of our development onto brownfield sites. And as Derry City is our principal settlement, we have agreed through the LDP process to grow Derry City sustainably, being aware of the needs of our citizens, focusing development as best we can in suitable sites that marry well with the existing infrastructure, our public transport, our employment and retail, etc. And that is the commitment we have given to all our citizens in the published LDP draft plan strategy. And page 220 of that clearly sets out the sustainable visions and objectives that we have in terms of our balanced growth that we wish to achieve. The plan strategy also shows the significant development land is available, almost in excess of twice of what we need. Again, on page 221, we set out that our development needs for the city are somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 houses. We have approximate commitments, if we include all our zonings commitments, windfall, urban capacity, for some 12 to 13,000. That's twice what the city is expected to take. So as laudable as the proposal is, we would say from the LDP team that there is significant capacity within the settlement development limit, and therefore the proposal is unjustified, as there is adequate land when you consider all that Sarah has reiterated in terms of the zonings in H2, H3 and H1 in areas in this part of the city where there is the social need. Also, we've had recent 2 applications in, which will be a further 160 in a similar area. So from the LDP perspective, we feel there is an adequate land in the city for this, particularly in the West Bank, and the precedent that we would be concerned about that this would set for similar applications that could come in and undermine the vision and the objectives of the emerging draft plan strategy that we've all worked on. The second point that I would just like to cover quickly is the rural issue that was raised in terms of whether these, if this proposal was to be minded to be approved, would that come out of the rural allocation or not? At the minute, any houses built since April 2017 will be monitored and reported in the annual monitoring report once the LDP is adopted. And the numbers will be compared against the indicative levels of housing that we've agreed with members and compared against strategic targets, targets for each settlement, the countryside and the green belt. Currently, this proposal is for outside of the settlement development limit. It would be inside the proposed green belt in the draft plan strategy. If we take all the figures that have been approved in the settlement, outside of the settlement development limit, this site, the adjacent site, Culmore and 2 in Eglinton, we come to some 370 houses that have been approved outside of the settlement development limits for around Derry. If you equate that as a percentage against the indicative levels that we were talking about for future housing over the LDP period in the countryside, that equates to some 26 to 34%, which is a significant amount. Would it all have to come out of the rural allocation? If members were minded to approve at the local policy plan stage, you could bring those sites within the settlement development limits, in which case then those become part of the urban. However, the concern that we would have in regards to that is that the PAC and DFI would possibly see the council approving significant housing developments in rural locations and may conclude that there is far too much land that is owned within the city that is not going to be required and therefore would need to be either dezoned or rezoned. And that would be a significant conversation to have with developers to say that your land may possibly not be needed and could prove to be a significant distraction to the progress of the LDP at both the plan strategy and the local policies plan stage.
Thank you, Johnny. Can I invite Daniel McAteer and Thomas Doherty to address the committee? You're very welcome, Mr. McAteer, Mr. Doherty.
Sorry, Chairman, just trying to get this computer moved because I'm using some notes here.
Okay. I've been informed that the mic's working again. And again, just I want to draw members' attention that Mr. McAteer has provided a lot of information prior to his presentation. So hopefully members have had the chance to familiarise themselves with that. And uh, can you're very welcome to address the committee, and you've 10 minutes to make any points, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I understood it was 5 minutes, but if it's 10, that's good. We'll try and keep it to 5 if we can. Sorry, I didn't get the last gentleman's name was Johnny something. Was he? I wanted to respond to that point first. I wasn't aware he was. There was just before I start, just in terms of the housekeeping issue. There's someone just
it's the planning officer.
Sorry?
The planning officer?
No, this gentleman just spoke here. Johnny.
He's a planning officer.
From the LDP, okay. Well, just in terms of a couple of points on that. First of all, there was a rural allocation point, and there seems to be clarification that the plan is only indicative at this stage, so it does not necessarily bite into any allocation. We had offered, after the last PDH, to meet with the planners to resolve that issue, to clarify matters of policy. It's unfortunate that that offer wasn't taken up, but we can deal with it if need be. I want to start off very briefly. You have a speaking note, I think, and hopefully you may have an opportunity to read that. I intend just taking some extracts from that. At the outset, I say that we do not accept that our application is outside the policy at all. I just want to put that marker in. We do not accept that it's outside the policy, or the law as it currently applies in this country, or the regulations as they currently apply in this country. The most recent area plan for this region expired in 2011. It was based on data going back to 1990, so as we speak, I think it now refers to 30 years ago. While certain land banks had been identified within the development limit, these lands have not been made available for affordable social housing. As a result, two negative economic consequences have followed. Firstly, there's been inflationary pressure on land prices, and secondly, there has been a crisis in the adequate supply of social and affordable housing. Some land is held by farmers who are perfectly entitled to exercise their right to continue farming rather than release their land for development. The purpose of our application here, given the integrity of the area plan, is to recalibrate the imbalance. We say, first of all, there are at least 10 material reasons to support the scheme. The first of which is that the presumption is in favour of sustainable development. Current law and regulation requires that the presumption is in favour of sustainable development. So unless there are solid and compelling reasons to say no, the committee members, we say, are obliged to say yes. The applicants say that there are no valid reasons to say no. We also say that there are multiple material considerations that should be given appropriate weight and which should support a decision to approve the application. This has been a very thorough and extensive application for an outline planning permission. This is a first-class, high-quality scheme. There's been wide community consultation, and the scheme has received a high level of support. All the neighbours have been notified, the schools have been involved, there have been all amount of engagement here for this particular scheme. The following departments and organisations have been consulted. I made a list of them, I shan't repeat them because they're in the document, but you can see who we consulted with. This has not been a shortcut application, it's been a very detailed and thorough application, even though it's only an outline application. Next point to make is that there's an urgent present need for social and affordable housing in this area. Present being the operative word. Present is the governing term in law. The planners are to make decisions, or the decision takers are to take decisions to reflect the present needs, not the needs of 30 years ago or 50 years' time, but the present needs. In a press release that appeared on the 12th of June 2020, MLAs from both Sinn Féin and SDLP recorded their concern about the shortage of affordable and social houses. So if there's so much land available and there's no problem, well, why is there such a housing crisis? I think the facts speak for themselves. In terms of the strategic plan, which this gentleman Johnny had talked about, he indicates that it's indicative at this stage, it's only in draft form at this stage, but Sinn Féin themselves have indicated at point 14.6 says that there's a need for Derry and Strabane combined of 4,750 units for the period 2017 to 2032. Given that there's current need in excess of 3,000 in Derry alone, it's sad to see. It's very difficult to imagine how those statistics were arrived at. You would almost think that the statistics are set to drive the inflationary prices of land up within a very constrained area. The project is being promoted by a team with a proven track record for delivery and who will not sit on the land waiting for land prices to escalate. This is real economic transfer of value. There will be a major economic boost to the local economy in the region of over £30 million. In particular, the project will be a catalyst for economic activity in the trades and the construction sector, which we say is vitally important, particularly for this region. The provision of green areas, community facilities and play areas will ease the burden on the local council. 258 families will benefit straight away, so that's probably about 1,000 people will benefit from this scheme in the short term, not 30 years' time or 50 years' time, but in the very short term. There are exceptional circumstances that we all face now as a result of COVID. This scheme will be progressed energetically and urgently, and it fits with Apex's development strategy. Mr. Forbes, who is the Director of Development at Apex, had talked to you at the PDH, and he had indicated that this would sit very neatly and they would go full steam ahead with the scheme to get this going. All relevant material considerations of need, public opinion, consultation responses, design and amenity, precedent and planning gain are positively engaged in this application. The development plan is hopelessly out of date and out of touch. This is an example whereby locally elected politicians taking control to respond to the present needs of the community in a way that breaks the developmental paralysis in this region. The decision will set a very positive precedent for decision makers and policy makers going forward. We would like to see a collaboration with elected representatives. We see this as a positive precedent. We do not subscribe to paralysing this area any further from 30-year-old boundaries that we cannot pass beyond. In terms of the regulatory and legal framework, I've dealt with that in a paper and I've dealt with it before, and I want to set it very, very briefly. The law that applies in Northern Ireland at the moment is the Planning Act 2011, which states the following. Overall, the aim is to create a planning system which is quicker, clearer, and more accessible. We're working with a 30-year plan, or a date plan. Power has been given to you people so that you will be able to make locally accountable, giving local politicians the opportunity to shape the areas within which they are elected. Decision-making processes will be improved by bringing an enhanced understanding of the needs and aspirations of local communities. The suggestion that farmers may be divested of their land is quite frankly scaremongering and untrue and not backed up by law or policy. And we will challenge that if that remains a position that the officers try to maintain. The preamble of the SPPS, which was introduced in 2015 by the then Minister, Mr. Durham, said that the planning system can and should do more to unlock development potential, support job creation and aid economic recovery, but not at the expense of compromising on environmental standards. Sustainable development is therefore at the heart of the SPPS of our planning system. We say that that's exactly what this scheme does. It unlocks development potential, it supports job creation, and will aid economic recovery and development in this area. Sustainable development is defined in the SPPS as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And we say this scheme does precisely that. It also gives guidance on plans and decisions should apply the presumption in favour of sustainable development. For decision taking, this means approving development proposals that accord with, I quote, up-to-date development plans. Our plan is now, God knows, at least 9 years out of date, based on figures that are 30 years old. And where there is no up-to-date plan, then the presumption is in our favour. If we could be bothered to take the initiative to try and make something happen, we should not be stopped from that. We should be encouraged and we should work collaboratively to develop these schemes for the benefit of the people here. Examples of material considerations are defined in the developmental practice note, which the officers rely on, note 16. We have to look at the development plan, whether or not it's up to date. Secondly, the need, public opinion expressed to the public representatives, and we say there's an overwhelming tide of public opinion that we should have these houses, and that finds expression through you people, the elected members. In terms of the use of the site design, I have some slides I want to refer to shortly. There's a huge planning gain as a result of this. This is not something to be frightened of or blocked. This is something to be supported, we say. We also say that section 4.17 gives specific guidance to yourselves in terms of making the decisions, because the decision is ultimately in your hands. In considering relevant material consideration, there are two essential matters. All relevant considerations must be fully considered and the appropriate weight given to each. It is not sufficient to rely on any one factor to the extent that all others are displaced. And weight, we say importantly, weight is a matter for the decision taker. So if you decide that the need of housing is greater than been slavishly adhering to a plan that's 30 years out of date, well, we would say that the weight obviously tilts in our favour for that. In conclusion, therefore, the current regulatory legal position as it applies in Northern Ireland in relation to planning applications is as follows. First of all, the decision makers are obliged to promote sustainable development. Secondly, sustainable development should be permitted, which meets the present needs of the community. Thirdly, the decision makers are required to have regard to an up-to-date plan. We don't even have an up-to-date plan. We have something that's practically written with a quill pen at this stage. So you'd have the regard to it, even if it was up to date, you can still stand outside it. The plan is not there to inhibit or prohibit development. It's there as a guide. The law says, and I've got case law on it, if anyone needs questions on law, I have the cases here with me. The requirement is you do not slavishly adhere to the plan. And then finally, the decision makers are required to take into account all material matters which have been presented on behalf of the applicants and give these matters the appropriate weight. The senior planner helpfully pointed out that there may be some residual technical issues that could be held as reserved matters, and we again had offered to bring Hamilton and RPS along, but because of the COVID restrictions, we were restricted as to who could deal with technical queries. We did offer to engage, and we also offered to engage quite early on in the process, about 3 months ago, to have a meeting with the previous Minister for the Environment and the senior planners to resolve any difference that may exist in the regulatory and the legal framework. We say that there are none. We say our position is correct, a correct interpretation of the law. The last PDH was attended also by the Development Director of... Well, that's quite timely because I was just going to read a letter from Apex, and Mr. Doherty has come along. I can read it in 2 seconds if that...
Yeah, I'll allow you to bring your remarks to a close.
This is fine. Thanks very much. I was about to say that Mr. Ray Forbes, who is the Development Director of Apex, had been to the PDH. He's attending Belfast today, so Thomas Doherty is here on his behalf to bring a letter to be read to the Council. It says as follows. Apex said that I can confirm that there's a continuing increase in housing stress, i.e. individuals who have 30 points more. Whilst this increase in housing stress is an issue across Northern Ireland, it is particularly acute in Derry and the West Bank. As Council will know, Apex is presently delivering homes at Skeg, a zoning referred to as H1C. Beyond this development, Apex has no other residential programme in the next 3 years. More specifically, Apex is engaged with the developers of H2 and expects to deliver homes in the zoning during the financial year 22-23. Major investment in enabling infrastructure will be required to bring forward this development, and delivery has been delayed as a result of the COVID pandemic. Whilst Apex has registered remaining lands at H3, the landowners confirmed the desire to continue farming in the incoming years. As such, there is no reason to prospect those homes being delivered in these lands. Apex is proud to partner in bringing forward this social and affordable housing scheme in Springtown. Significant effort and investment has been made in devising this high-quality proposal that embodies the corporate goals of Apex and sets well-being as a priority. Our in-house team has reviewed the proposal and are satisfied that it meets the relevant design standards and is fully deliverable and operable as a new neighbourhood in this city. Bear in mind that Apex own the adjoining houses that you've heard mentioned there. Should outline plan permission be granted, Apex will ensure the project is brought forward energetically and immediately so that construction and delivery of these homes commence as soon as possible. And the final point is that development can be financed through a combination of public grant and private finance secured by Apex. Apex has the benefit of some cheap finance from Europe that will run out in a few years' time, and we're hoping that that cheap finance will then be reflected in cheaper rents for this type of scheme. So thanks very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McAteer. Members, is there any questions to Mr. McAteer or for Mr. Doherty from Apex? No. Councillor Boyle?
Chair, I actually don't have a question as such, Mr. McAteer. However, Chair, as you all know, I sometimes struggle with that particular microphone and I couldn't quite pick up everything that was being said in the letter, and I would very much like to get an opportunity to read the letter, and perhaps others might want to do so too. The letter that's just been read out from Apex, if that's okay with you.
Would you prefer somebody else to read it out? If that could be past the head of planning, we could ask a head of planning to read that letter out.
Thank you, Chair. Just Can you hear this okay? Yeah, thanks. Okay. Just so that all members can hear the letter that the applicant read out there just at the end of the presentation. So this is from Apex. I can confirm that there is a continuing increase in housing stress. Individuals who have 30 points or more in brackets. Whilst this increase in housing stress is an issue across Northern Ireland, it is particularly acute in Derry and the West Bank. As Council will know, Apex is presently delivering homes in Skeg, a zoning referred to as H1C. Beyond this development, Apex has no other major residential development programmed in the next 3 years. More specifically, Apex is engaged with the developers of H2 and expects to deliver homes within this zoning during the financial year 2022 and 2023. Major investment in enabling infrastructure will be required in bringing forward this development. Delivery has been delayed as a result of the COVID pandemic. Whilst Apex has registered the remaining lands as H3, the landowner has confirmed a desire to continue farming in the oncoming years. As such, there is no reasonable prospect of homes being delivered on these lands. Apex is proud to be a partner bringing forward this sociable and affordable housing scheme at Springtown. Significant effort and investment has been made in devising this high quality proposal that embodies the corporate goals of Apex and sets well-being as a priority. Our in-house team has reviewed the proposal and are satisfied that it meets the relevant design standards and is fully deliverable and operable as a new neighbourhood in the city. Should outline planning permission be granted, Apex will ensure that the project is brought forward energetically and immediately so that construction and delivery of these homes can commence as soon as ever possible. The development will be financed through a combination of public grant and private finance secured by Apex. And that's from Ray Forbes, Director of Development and Procurement. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And I suppose the letter, that letter outlines Mr. Forbes' presentation during the predetermination hearing. A lot of that information was previously presented to the committee. Any further questions, members? Councillor Mooney.
Thank you, Chair. Just from the outset, Mr. McAteer, I'm just saying I have no vote because I wasn't on the planning committee. I've only joined planning in the last month. But I was just interested in your submissions anyway and the arguments you put forward. And essentially what I'm sort of hearing is, are you saying that the plan as it stands, the actual present plan that we have which is here in existence, are you saying that we should have no regard to that whatsoever?
No, I think the law, I think you're a lawyer, I think you'll know the law on this. Do you want me to quote the case for you?
No, go ahead. No,
No, I think what there has to be is a regard to an up-to-date development plan. So I think that expression up-to-date is the guiding force. There's an interesting case in 2017 where the High Court in England declared a plan 2011 as on any view out of date and should be disregarded. So there are a number of judicial interpretations. But we say that the overall policy objective is to meet the needs of the present. Implied in that would, of course, be an up-to-date plan. Not much point in having a plan to go out and play Man United next week with a team that was sort of 60 years ago. So, firstly, we would say, well, there are some cases that say you don't have a regard if it's out of date. That's really a criticism of those who make the plan. But even if it were up to date, you are to have a regard to it. But the famous law, as you probably know, is you do not need to slavishly adhere to it, slavishly stick to it. So it's not meant to be a constraining device. It's meant to be a guiding device. Not sure if that answers it.
No, that's fine. Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Mooney, can you switch off your mic? And I suppose that specific quote, legal quote, has been well rehearsed within this chamber. Councillor Dobbins.
Thank you, Chair. I also don't have a vote on this, but I would like to ask a question. I have heard with regard to the LDP that there is other areas. Can you just please tell me, whilst we do recognise social need, right, and myself and Tony Hassan at then reiterated that time and time again, but could you please tell me why this development, because this development is so good on paper, why can't it be somewhere else? Why does it have to be where you have applied for?
Obviously I can't speak for other landowners and what they want to do, but when you look at the land that's available quite near to us, for example, there's quite a chunk of land there, and the landowners there have decided, look, we want to continue to farm. That's the right. This is a bit of land that's been partially developed already. There's 53 houses there already. We think it's a great location. We think it's a scheme that can be delivered. It's the same team that will deliver it, and it is our land. So we're promoting it. Obviously, that's what we want to do. The applicants are promoting it for that reason. Why can't it go somewhere else? I think Ray Forbes has touched on that. That in terms of just the land isn't been released to the market. Councillor Logue at the last meeting raised the issue that some of the land's been priced out of the bracket where social housing just doesn't work economically. You know, you've got a build price of X, you have a land price of Y. All the money now seems to be in the land. This is the inflationary impact that I talk about. So the lack of availability of land, I mean, we keep hearing that there's all this surplus land. The reality is it's not been released at all for whatever reasons. Again, I'm not here to criticise landowners. I can't comment on that. But, we think it's an ideal scheme. It's a great location. It's not out in the countryside. I mean, if I could ask that I've actually referred to, this is a project that's been on now since 2005, I think. I'm not sure if I could get this shown, this slide that has to be shown as a, yeah, Councillor Boyle has it there. There's a map showing just how this really happened. This has gone back to 2009. The original developer, a man called Sheehan, had built these houses out. He wanted to go on up here and was told, made an application that's been referred to. That was refused. He was told, look, you can appeal, but look, this is 2009, 2010. This will be brought in the next 2011. I was told back then that this will be brought in 2011. The initial plan for this was to be private housing. A decision was taken to go for the cheaper route, the social housing, which is less profitable. And yet, once that was done, he was then stopped from development on the road. And if you just look at that map, you'll see this isn't really well used agricultural land. This far land over here, which is the Haddocks farm, that's a really well farmed piece of land. So again, it's up to Haddocks if they want to farm. Of course, that's their right to do so. And we say it's just a natural progression there. And for all the reasons we've set out in the previous reports, all the consultee replies, we've planned it properly, it can integrate into the scheme. Apex are saying that we'll integrate into a good management scheme that they have, so that's the commitment that we would give. But I'm reluctant to speak about anybody else's land, if you know what I mean. I can't really speak for them. So.
Thank you. Councillor Mellon.
Thank you, Chair. I also don't have a vote. I'm also new to planning. I just had some points that I would have liked to have discussed. So we can see from your notes, and there are some good explanations there around it. There seems to be, from listening to officers and listening to others within the area and looking at the local need, that there is a gap to what council believe to be sufficient land and zone land as to what's readily available on the market. I was wondering if you would agree with that or not, and that we do see that this pandemic has left the city and district at a greater need for economic recovery and even greater need for social and affordable homes. And you have noted that there will be around 30 million investment coming into the city through this development. And the fact that this application does sit on the periphery of the plan, I believe that the measuring up to the benefits that it provides to the local need within this community and within the families waiting and housing stress or homelessness, that greater need should give consideration to the application as well. But it was just around that, I suppose, around the land bank and the gaps that, in terms of even the H2 site, we've been hearing for up to 20 years that would be available. This land, is it right to say that they are ready to develop and that these houses will come to fruition soon?
Well, thank you for that. I mean, I think there's several points here. I mean, first of all, the COVID thing, this is completely unique. No one predicted this. We were at a PDH and then suddenly COVID happened. I think there's going to be an economic wilderness, particularly for places like Derry and Strabane, which are so heavily dependent on government funding. I mean, last Wednesday, for example, 5,000 people commuted into the centre of London. The same day last year, there was 550,000, so it's 1%. That's where the tax take comes from. We need to be doing something locally to generate economic development. I think COVID is going to smash places like here in Strabane. So this would be a good example of how local officials can help that economic development. And I think that's important. That's the first point. The second point, we've heard that land that was ascribed back in 1990 is now sufficient for needs. I read a most recent press release from cross-party press release in 2012, June 2020, screaming for the shortage of housing. I think it's purely economic that land prices have risen and therefore they're outside the grasp of the affordability for social housing, and that redistribution of wealth, as it were, in other words, land increases in value, which makes building houses unattractive, which means profit would then have to be passed on in a different way. So this scheme redresses that balance because the houses are affordable, they're very, very good quality houses, and as you can see, they're very well spaced out. It's a really high quality scheme. I'm grateful to Johnny, sorry, I don't know his surname, but Johnny to say it was a laudable scheme. And we're grateful for that comment. We think it is a laudable scheme. So we think it responds to the present need. And as you indicated, the decision takers have a requirement to take on board material factors, material considerations, and give them the appropriate weight. So if you decide that the weight for people getting houses for 258 families is greater than the weight of someone making more money, then you can ascribe that weight. That's a matter that's in your hands. That's what you're elected for. So hopefully that addresses the question. Thank you.
Councillor Boyle.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a vote. Just while others are declaring they don't, I do. I'm interested in the assertion that you make that the plan that we're operating to is outdated. Because one could perhaps argue that every time you publish a plan, it might be outdated a week later. In truth, I think you might accept that. However, I'm particularly interested in relation to the fact that if a plan is outdated, and yet throughout the period of the plan's development, there have been significant developments in areas along the Skeg Road, for example, and obviously now the H2 site has progressed to where it is now. And believe me, I genuinely believe that's a much better position than it was when I first joined the planning committee 5 odd years ago or whatever it was. But again, it's about that idea that there already are, or certainly from the officer's report, it's been presented that there's an abundance of opportunity for development, housing development of all sorts, somewhere in the region of 10,000, I think it was, in the City District area. So why here? Again, Councillor Dobbins asked that question. Why here? And, you know, is it because this is the land that is in the possession of this particular developer and they can't get their hands on the other land because others own it? Other people own it?
I don't think it's as cynical as that. I mean, that's a very cynical way of putting it. I mean, it almost sounds as this is a negative thing that we're trying to do. Let me try to take it back a stage. If I make some political points, forgive me, but I'll make them anyway. The policy under which Northern Ireland is governed, whether we like it or not, the policy under which it is governed is established basically on a UK-wide basis. They set a policy, they set lines, and then all things fall into place. That's fine. When you apply a policy consistency, that's fine, as long as it's fair, as long as it's transparent, as long as it's up to date. What we seem to have got here is the tail end of that, because we've got the policy aspirations, but the delivery in this region has fallen hopelessly short. Now that gives rise to the two inflationary issues, two microeconomic issues that I identify. First of all, there is a blatant crisis in social and affordable housing. It's a blatant crisis, it's just there. And the second point is there has been this inflationary impact on land. Okay, so that's what's happened. So whatever the reasons, and whether people, as I say, want to farm, which is their God-given right if they wish to, the land just doesn't become available. Now, you would almost think, taking a cynical view, that somewhere many, many decades ago, someone restricted the supply of land to drive prices up. That is specifically a policy objective of the UK government to avoid. So you'd almost think that. And there's a persuasive argument to say that, but that's not our business. What we say is that the person whose whose vision this was, this guy Sheehan, he was out running on the Springtown Road many, many years ago, and he sees this land and says, this is the natural progression for this town. So he went along and assembled the team and assembled the planning application. Was approached actually by your leader at the time, SDLP, to say, look, could you not build social housing up there because that's what we need? And there was support given for that. And hence you get the 120 houses and then the 15 houses. And that was ab initio. Now, he was told back then, for the extend that scheme, don't worry, it'll be brought in the next planning limit 2011. Now, you're quite right to say that once published, if you publish on today, tomorrow it's out of date, but I don't think that's how it works. I think they say, here's the plan for the next 5-10 years. The legal definition for out of date is 5 years housing supply. So it was to take your point, of course, the day after it's published, but it is a forward-looking document. Now, we were told, for example, back in 2009-10, don't appeal this decision because it'll be brought in the next area limit. You'll see from the map that there's a road just up here, which, I mean, if you want to talk about physical boundaries, that may have been the natural boundary here, right? And you can see where the works were being prepared. This is the land that was shot down. So you would nearly wonder what's in the minds of the people who are controlling the game, to put it that way. Because the net effect, what we don't need to debate is this: there's a critical shortage of housing, social housing. Apex and other housing associations can only afford to pay a certain price for these houses. And when you look at the site values, I mean, we're almost in Kensington house land values here at this stage. So that's what the problem really is. And I do not accept for one moment that there is land available for social and affordable housing. And I also do not accept for one moment that we in this building should be constrained by decisions that suited what happened in 1990. I think the whole 2011 Act gives you the power locally to actually stand back and look at this more holistically and say, what do people need today? Here's the reason. This isn't really mean, I'm saying that there are many material reasons why this scheme should work. There isn't one single justifiable reason why it should be refused. There's nothing here that isn't capable of being dealt with in a reserved matter, and we can start tomorrow morning. So I'm not sure if that deals with it. It's not a cynical, every promoter, I think, is entitled to promote their economic interests to bring forward developments, but that almost sounds as if they're to be criticised for that. They're trying to create economic activity in their own hometown. I think that's, to use John's word, a very laudable objective. That's been just me.
Thank you. There's other indicated speakers, Councillor Boyle. Alderman McClintock.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Daniel, for your presentation. Excuse me.
Thank you.
I am one that has a vote on this today. And if I can serve to say, first of all, that I was on the committee in 2016 whenever the application for the rounding off came before us. And I was fully supportive of that because I felt that was a sensible thing to do, a rounding off, which we made very clear at the time meant that it was a rounding off with no further phases after to follow on after that. 2018, I understand it, just looking back there, the officers mentioned that they engaged with you about the possibility of an application on the site, and they gave advice to you that it would be outside the limits and therefore would not be advisable. But yet there has been 5 fields purchased whenever. So I suppose what I'm wondering is, and I absolutely agree with you, there's a housing need. I don't disagree in any way with that, and obviously a need for social housing. But yet Johnny has outlined to us the details of where the other possible sites for houses can be. But what I'm saying is, you've told us that you don't accept that the application is outside the limit. You don't agree with the law. You don't agree with the regulations, and you're telling us that we need to be bothered to take up local decision making here. So you're actually saying to us, just go ahead with this regardless of what the law says, what the regulations are, because whether we like it or not, and yes, our LDP is long overdue renewing, was what I'm saying is that you're telling us to go against all of those. But how do we know, and you're not going to come back in another year's time with another, break the precedent again, let's get another couple of fields. I'm not convinced that you've argued your case strongly enough with me to see why we should make this a particular consideration outside of all the rules and regulations that we have.
Well, first of all, thanks for the question and the observations. I just want to pick you up on a few points of note first of all, because I know you struck a chord, Mr. Boyle was having a chuckle while you said, I told you to disregard the law, and just for his benefit and your benefit. I'm not for a moment suggesting you disregard the law at all, and I have not for one moment suggested that you disregard the regulation. What I say is that you should strictly adhere to the law, and you should strictly adhere to the regulation. I also had said that what I wanted to see here was a more collaborative approach where developers could sit down with planners and resolve issues of law so precisely this sort of problem wouldn't occur, whereby you're being told one thing by the officers and then I'm coming here and saying something which you clearly have misunderstood, because I'm not inviting you to disregard the law at all. I'm asking you to apply the law and not be misled about the law. What I'm saying is that the officer's presentation about the law here is incorrect and incomplete. Now, I'm quite happy to open that law here. As I said, I had offered to go along with the planners and with the former minister and discuss this so that these issues could be narrowed, because I'm very sympathetic to anyone's position making a decision that I'm coming here and saying one thing and the officers are trying to give weight to an alternative argument. Now, and I'm not saying you disregard anything. What I'm saying is that you regard, first of all, the policy. The policy is to meet the present needs of the people. We have a severely outdated area plan that is outdated since 2011. It was based and predicated on information and data back in 1990. It is embarrassingly out of date. I think it's the most out of date plan possibly in the rest of the UK. That's the first point. So the law says that when you make your decision, you look at the development plan and you look at other material considerations. In terms of looking at the development plan, the law requires that you have regard to the plan. You have regard to an up-to-date plan. So we don't have an up-to-date plan to have regard to. That's only my point. You are obliged to look at other material considerations, such as housing need. Now, either there is a housing need or there isn't. I think you've accepted that there is such a housing need. This responds to this. There's nothing here to say that we should be blocked. There's nothing here to say that what we're doing here is something wrong. And we're certainly not suggesting that people disregard the law or turn a blind eye to the law. We're not saying that at all. We're saying that we should apply the law. So I would like to correct that, just so, forgive me if that's the impression I've given. I'm not inviting you to do that at all. I wouldn't want to compromise anyone. And in terms of the initial discussions we had with the planners, we were told at the time that this was 98% complete. We accept that our scheme is outside a line that was cast in sand back in 1990, and it's called the 2011 Development Plan. But that line has now passed. The case law says that a plan that ran out in 2011 is, and I quote, on any view, out of date. So that's the point. So I'm hoping that I haven't misled you.
Thank you, Mr. McAteer, and I think we're in danger of going around in circles here. Councillor Boyle, have you anything new to bring?
Hopefully there's always something new to bring, Chair, but again, it's just to, and it doesn't necessarily need a reply, actually, Mr. McAteer, but clearly Johnny McNee, who is one of the team involved in the current local development plan, and many of us have been involved in that as well, so we understand the process, and we clearly understand that the process takes some considerable time to get through various iterations and consultations that have to be done. And by virtue of what you're telling me in your view about outdated plans, then I'm kind of getting a bit concerned that when we publish the next plan, that someone, maybe not you, but someone like you, will come along in 2030 and tell me that a plan that was published 7 years before is outdated. And so there's an argument about when does your plan become outdated?
No, I think
and I was going to say to you, all we can work on or work with what we've got.
Yep.
And this is what we've got to work with. And I think the important thing for you to do is to actually address the fact that this application runs contrary to PPS 12, 13, 21, 3 and 7.
Well, just to take your point again, first of all, the plan's a forward-looking plan. So when the plan is published, it will be for the next incoming years. So it won't be someone can come in and say it's out of date. So for example, if we had an area plan today that was running to 2025, I would be saying to you, you must have regard to that up-to-date plan. You don't have to slavishly adhere to it, but you must have regard to it. So we're not looking to undermine that policy at all. That's the first thing. In terms of all the other policy points that you've dealt with, there's nothing in those that cannot be addressed either as a reserve matter or as part of the long-term plan, if and when this long-term plan is developed. We would say that would be our response to that. I'm not sure how much time I have to deal with that, but again, we did offer 2.5 months ago to sit down and resolve all the regulatory and legal issues, so precisely this type of conversation wouldn't have to be done on the hoof. These are difficult matters to come up to speed with, I'm sure. But we say that we have dealt with them in our paper. I'm happy to go through with it now in detail if you wish. I'm not sure if time permits. But
Mr. McAteer, I hope you can appreciate that we've discussed and we've given ample opportunities for discussion through the predetermination hearing, through various discussions, and it's unfair at this stage to address the committee and tell them that we don't have time to go into it at this and to go into that level of detail. So I just want we've rehearsed this quite a lot, and we're getting to the stage now where if there's any points that haven't been covered, if members have any questions that haven't been touched on, can they address them to Mr. McAteer now? And there is of course opportunities to ask questions to the officer afterwards. Is there any further questions to Mr. McAteer? No. Thank you, Mr. McAteer. And just before you go, I'm going to give Mr. Doherty the opportunity, if he wishes to make any point to the committee. No. Thank you. See, before I go to questions to the officer, I'm going to give Maura an opportunity to come on and respond to some of the issues that Mr. McAteer had raised.
Members, just on a more sort of strategic level in regard to just information and potential inaccuracies, in terms of the plan, what we're dealing with here is the extant plan. That's the existing plan. Our plan isn't more out of date than anyone else's, but the obvious, every single plan currently in Northern Ireland and the decisions we're making currently until we bring in all the new LDPs, and as you all are very familiar with, all councils in Northern Ireland have been working hard to try to get to that point. And at this point, we don't have new plans brought in through the new legislation, but we are all making all the committee decisions across Northern Ireland at the minute are all being made based on the current plans and the appropriate weight being attached to it. So I just think it's important that I highlight that to you, and all the decisions that you've been making since we've transferred over are based on the current plan. The point that has been made regarding the LDP, the future, that there is, technically, the potential impact on the new plan. It's because of the numbers that are proceeding to be approved in the interim will be taken into account, and you did take those into account yourselves in terms of the plan strategy, which is currently in the public domain. And that was the point that I just want to be clear on, that Johnny was making, is that where that's breached, immaterial of what person's view is or any individual's view is of what constitutes urban or rural, or whether it's countryside or not, is immaterial. It is defined in planning, in terms of how we deal with planning policy and planning decisions, that countryside is outside the development limit. The development limit isn't just a minor sort of and discrete part of the plan. It is fundamental. It is a fundamental principle intrinsic in the system, and it is also fundamental in terms of sustainability, and was ahead of its time in terms of a mechanism in terms of climate change and sustainability. So you go back to the pillars of the SPPS. So it's just important. That's how important the development limit is. It's not just a minor so that's why officers have put significant weight on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions to Sarah? Councillor Hargan.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, we've discussed this a lot, and I think that the pandemic's been mentioned, and the impact that it's going to have in the city, and I think we're all aware of that, and we already know that there's a desperate need here for housing. I think every councillor is very, very aware of that, and that's why people are giving this so much time and looking at it from every angle. But there is also the issue of what precedent it would set. It seems to me if we would rule in favour of this, and I think that every crisis creates opportunities for different people, and sometimes you would then vote to do away with regulations because there's a need for it, and that concerns me, and that's what I'm hearing a wee bit about today. Because if we do it here once, we then I think we make a mess of our the precedent setting. So Johnny mentioned a few things. So if either Sarah or Johnny wants to address them. So one, Johnny mentioned that if we authorise this, it would have an impact on the zoned land within the city limits in terms of developers, and that they would potentially lose out, or they would then. So could I just get a bit of clarification on that, because that seems very, very relevant since we're talking about land prices, and I think that that's very concerning. If there's and the second question connected to that is, within our zoned areas for house building, would officers say that we are on track to meet the needs of the district, because we know that there's a massive housing crisis? And is there any things financially or land pricing issues that are holding that up? And then the last one is, the local area development plan. So this is what we have right now. Is there discussions about expanding that line? Is that part of the discussions? Because I think that's relevant as well, so that we're all clear on what we're the broader picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harkin. And I suppose all three of those questions are relative to the LDP. So I'll ask Johnny to come in.
Thank you for the questions. And through you, Chair. First of all, the question of expanding the limits that you raised, or moving the line, the LDP process is done in two parts. First of all, we do the strategic sort of overview for the entire district, and once that's adopted, we then subsequently move to the local policies plan, which is where we go around each of the 47 settlements within the district, and we define a settlement development limit, and we show where all the various zonings are going to go. So that's a stage down the line yet. At the minute, we're just getting all the policies and the overarching controls in place as a result of consultation through an adoption process, and then we move on to the specifics for each settlement. In terms of the second point that you raised, it could be an issue that could be raised, that if this was approved, set a precedent, that not just social housing providers, but private housing providers, might decide, well, we'll look for things around the fringe, but on the other side of the very important line that was raised, the settlement development limit, that could, either undermine the vision and objectives and possibly the soundness of the LDP process, which is what we are critically tasked with, ensuring that everything we put into the plan is sound. And it could be that at the adoption stage of the plan strategy, that the PAC and DFI could perceive that if we are approving these locations outside of the settlement development limit for substantial numbers of housing, they will raise the question, well, what do you have all your existing housing zonings inside your city for? And if you don't need them, you need to dezone them or rezone them for something else. And that possibly raises the spectre of having to go back to someone and say, do you mind awfully if we rezone your land for something else? And if they were looking potentially for full development value of that, to be told that it's going to go to something with possibly a lesser financial rate, could set in store difficult conversations for the council and the plan.
Thank you, John. John, and if you answered this, I mightn't have caught it, but it was in relation to, and I think most councillors in this chamber would know the answer to this, but it's in relation to, are we on course to meeting the housing need that exists within our city and district?
I just want to come in there, and we've obviously covered this in the report in terms of land availability, and there's ample land available within the current development limit for the city, and in fact, we are fully engaged in not just approving, and those social housings currently being developed whilst in the middle of the pandemic. We've also been approving houses in the middle of a pandemic, 3 weeks after lockdown. Officers went into the building and issued decisions sort of obviously to facilitate that. I think the most important thing is in terms of figures. I mean, H2 is potentially for 3,500 houses. We've also got H1B, which is another 1,500 houses. That doesn't take on board brownfield land, and the many different decisions that officers or members have made and officers have made in the last few years that are now committed and available for development. So that's that's in terms of answering that question in terms of availability. Um, and we are engaged very with anyone that owns any of these parcels of land in terms of pads, H2 included, and has been the case for some time, and also in regard to social housing providers in regard to that site as well. So I mean, we've made that clear before. We made that clear at the PDH. Um, there's also the issue, which I think is quite a strategic issue in regarding land pricing issues. I did also mention this before, whether it was at the PDH or a previous committee members, regarding this is a matter, I think, at a very high level, which is about the housing executives' role in terms of, and the social housing providers in terms of providing social housing throughout Northern Ireland, and about the land values and how they go about encouraging site selection in order to promote and deliver social housing. That what we need to be very mindful of and careful of is that we don't undermine that the process, because I mean we have the map here in front of us, and I mean I can't underestimate or underplay the significance of this decision, members. And I know that you're very, very aware of the city, but I have deliberately placed this map in front of you today to show the fact that this is about where, not amount. We have an amount at the moment that's sufficient. Setting a precedent today regarding a 200 for the exception being for social housing. It is my view, and I've worked with a considerable number of members for the last 10 years that have stepped forward to me and feel, not just in this committee but other outside the committee, that there are areas around the whole of the city and outside the city and district where social housing is a need at different occasions. So the precedent is that in every area along this map where you see a potential pink zone, and these are in areas that we've maybe not built out yet, there's potential for this blue line, and hopefully you can all see it. This blue line is coming here. Why would it be any different, members, should a private housing developer or another social housing provider come along to you next month, the next month, and the next month? Because we've already had people already coming to us in terms of preliminary advice. So, if we walk ourselves right through this development limit, right through the whole of the city, from the east bank to the west bank, why would it not be the case for some other supporter? Why would their land not be, more valuable or more pertinent? And I think the question was asked earlier, and I suppose I just have to point that out as your head of planning. Spatially, what's the difference? And that's what a precedent is, and a wide-ranging precedent. So sorry if I'm stating the obvious, but I think it's important that you look at the map and you look at the scale and the extent of the opportunities that might exist, and how much your decision may have an impact on the land value. Because if somebody today thinks that their land is worth less, then they might be more interested in releasing their land in the countryside as defined in the planning system. So in regard to the point, I don't know if Johnny made it clear, you asked specifically at this part, was there a potential for this part of the city to expand? And I think it was Councillor McClintock had raised the point that, is there going to be another creep where we're coming back to the next line? At the moment, I mean, in the discussions with yourselves in terms of the LDP, we don't have a significant amount of scope to extend the development limit anywhere, not just here, especially given the fact that we've still got a zoning for 2,500 houses right beside it, within relative speaking and planning terms, where other members of the committee, I'm sure, would have ideas about where there's scope for other opportunities outside this city or the district as part of the overall evaluation that you'll be doing in terms of the strategy for your plan for your future for your city and district. So hopefully that helps to answer it. Sorry, it was a bit long. Thank you.
Thank you, Maura. And was useful to see the map with all the opportunity sites throughout the city, and the particular in this case the city. Um, and for those who have been involved in the LDP process, would be fully aware of them. But I'm also, and I suppose I'm speaking on behalf of everybody in the committee. We would much rather to see applications come forward into the committee that are within zoned housing land. But in terms of setting precedent, I just also like to remind members that we judge every application on its individual merit. So we, as members of this committee, we ultimately have control of that as well. So in my personal view, I see housing need as a significant material matter, and that's something why there's a significant housing need within our city and district. I don't see a precedent of building houses as a negative thing. Councillor Mellon.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a question or two, maybe to Johnny or yourself, Maura. Johnny, you spoke around today someone might feel that their development value or their land value was a certain amount, and if we were going to have these difficult conversations, as you say, with the landowners, it might lead to that frustration. But I think that this development value is the frustration, and it is the root of these issues, that the fear of, you were saying more around the fear of other people coming after this and setting the precedent. Is council aware of how valued zone land is, and the issue with the landlocking? Because we can have plans, we can choose to have these ambitions for the city, but if people are landlocking their areas, that people are having to go outside to provide that housing, be it private, affordable or social. If we are having a plan that zones land and then gives that owner that development value as it's been stated, then how are we aiming to take action on the land? Is there times for the land? And why is people having to go outside of this area? Because, as the speaker mentioned, that if you're going to build social or affordable homes on it, it's not economically viable. How is council choosing to target or address that? We've heard of individual people's lands, such as the farms, and farmers wanting to continue farming or letting the land grow in price. Are we allowing that to do we have governance over that? And if we don't, then how can we have governance over this particular zone as well?
Well, whilst considering the LDP, we must go back over and check the land that's currently zoned and ask individuals if they're still willing or want to zone that land, because then we have obviously more options if they don't, if they want the land dezoned. And H3 and other landowners, I think there was possibly only one, if I recall, that was less. I mean, maybe not, maybe they all did. All, no, Johnny's confirming. All in our whole district, both Derry and Strabane, have all indicated that they want the land retained as housing. So that we've done a check on that, but I would put back to the fact that I have raised this issue with the chief planner in Northern Ireland, and have asked, and they're actually setting up some sort of a subgroup with planning and housing executive and DFI to try and address this issue of social housing need and dealing with it through the existing plans. I mean, I personally have taken that on as I believe this is a strategic issue, because in the interim, as we're trying to move through what is the proper process in order to change and adapt and amend development limits, is through a statutory process to allow all parties that own land or don't own land that have a voice, that's why you do it through that process, which is then independently examined by a third party to give us advice as to whether or not those decisions are appropriate or not. So, in my view, that's the proper process to do this and not to be leapfrogging it. In planning terms, I can't delve outside that in terms of surmising and getting involved. I mean, the reason for the plan is to create certainty and to give that certainty, so when people buy land or purchase land, they know the value of zoned land is obviously higher than the value of unzoned land, and the same goes for the value of commercial land as opposed to housing. That change that adapts over a period of time, but that's not our role to get involved in that. What we do is we provide the certainty and the system. So I suppose that's where we are in regard to that.
Sorry, Chair, can I just ask one follow-up? I'm just asking around the governance of zone land. So if the applicants has approached an area that was zone land and they said, you know what, we're fine, we're going to continue farming. If that land is zoned for housing, is there any governance over them lands? Have we any say over when they're going to release the land or no?
We can't make, we don't have powers, if that's you're asking. We don't have powers to make someone release land. That does, our powers in planning doesn't go that far to force someone to release land. We, as a council, have powers to zone land or dezone land or permit development on it, which will increase possibly the value or change the use of the land. That's as far as our powers and remit go.
Any further questions, members? Councillor Maguire.
Chair, all them lands that's zoned, is there not issues with some of them? Like some of them landlocked, some of them just not ready to be built on at the minute. Are they all available and ready to go? There was an issue with H2 one time, was there? With access? No?
Sorry, Councillor, that's all been resolved. We approved an outline permission for the site based on all the phasing and all the potential requirements in terms of the infrastructure. So that's been resolved. It's a matter now of working through the reserve matters, which is ongoing with officers in terms of discussions and pads. Yeah.
Yep, that's H2. But all the other ones are ready to go.
Yeah, we have approved outline permissions concepts for most of our remaining zoned land inside the West Bank. H1B has also been approved for 1,500 houses. That had been previously Moorlands. I'm not sure who owns the lands now, but yeah. And as you can see, H1BC, as I call it, on the southern side, is practically built out now, and you have all, as a committee, approved quite a significant amount of those full and reserve matters applications which are under construction or completed.
Councillor Boyle.
Just for the benefit of my memory and perhaps others in the committee, just a quick question again in relation to that as a follow-up to the head of planning, Chair, if you don't mind. So we have H2 and we have H1B. What's the quantum of housing when they are potentially developed? I think that's important to know.
Yeah, I'll just show it to you here on the map, Councillor Boyle. So we have, well, we have 3,500 here, and we have another 1,500 here, and we've already approved and built out practically, as you know, running along scaled links. You'll all have seen it. It's still under construction, this part here, but you've recently approved the reserve matters and full applications for most of that part of the site. Isn't that right, sir? Yeah.
My specific question, obviously, is if you add H2 and you add H1B, how many are left to build? That's a significant number, I'm guessing.
Approximately 5,000. I sort of mentioned that before.
Alderman Kerrigan.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me in. Just clarification, it has been touched on. I was just, at the moment, if this is approved, will these houses be classified as 258 additional houses in the countryside? Is that the state of play in regard to it?
Yes.
So what impact would that have on planning in the countryside in terms of housing, in terms of the number of houses built in a period? Would it have an impact on them all their plans for developments in the countryside?
Well, that would have an impact on your consideration of what housing you would be able to allocate out as a committee for the forthcoming plan, but obviously would undermine our position when we take this to independent examination, because we'll be questioned on the current allocation and the remaining allocation when we get to that point. So we would have to make sure that we can justify why we have done that, and we would have to then reconsider the figures of the overall allocation. So you'd have to justify it.
Councillor Kelly.
Thanks, Chair. And just for clarification, did I not just hear the officer say that at the point of the next stage that any allocations, and I think he did reference a number of sites, I heard Eglinton certainly mentioned, could be brought within the development limits, and so any housing at that stage which is currently rural could be recalibrated then as urban would have no impact on the rural housing allocation?
I think the bottom line here, committee, is that the overall figure of allocation for the city and district, whether it's rural or urban, has to add up. And that will mean, members will have to decide what they allocate or reallocate to each district, each particular location. So by changing the goalposts, open the floodgates, and raising opportunities to change or compromise the development limit and set precedents, then clearly I can't predict what that will do. You're asking me questions, I'm crystal ball gazing here. However, presently, in terms of the facts of the figures, you will be putting yourselves in a position where you have to ask yourselves how you will juggle the figures and how you will ask us to justify it at independent examination.
Yeah. And I suppose there's a lot of questions around, a lot of the discussion is around land zonings and land zonings that were previously zoned in the Derry area plan. One thing is for certain, given the housing need in this city in particular, we can't be in a situation at the end of this plan that we're sitting with significant zonings that haven't been developed, that had been zoned in the early 90s. So that's something that it simply would be unacceptable. We need to be bearing that in mind. But that's a discussion for another day. It's a discussion when we're having LDP meetings and specifically. But is there any further questions around this, Councillor Kelly?
Chair, just for clarification, am I right in saying that the housing executive have powers to vest land for social housing, but that those powers are subject to a value for money test?
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Housing purposes if needs be, yes.
Everybody catch that, or will I ask Philip to repeat?
So I don't want this to turn into a drums and karaoke party, but yes, no, there are certainly powers for land to be vested for housing purposes. I'm not familiar with the intimate detail of those because they're not council powers.
Any further questions, comments, members? No. Well, members, we've discussed this at great length, and there's a recommendation in front of us. Members, it's over to yourselves whether or not you wish to accept that officer's recommendation, to refuse or not. Councillor Boyle.
Well, Chair, I'll keep it as brief as I can. Obviously, we've had a predetermination hearing, and actually quite a lot of the questions that I would have asked in this committee have already been answered at that hearing, and I was content enough with those answers at that time, both from the applicant, the answers from the applicant, and indeed from our officers. Very specifically, Chair, I'm going to propose actually that we accept the officer recommendation to refuse, very clearly on the grounds that there are very significant reasons for that refusal, 9 of which are on the screens in front of us, and I haven't heard anything that convinces me that that can be overcome in particular. I also have very particular concerns in relation to the sustainability issues of developing in this particular part of the city when there already are tranches of land right across city and district that are ripe for immediate development, considering H2 in particular and the number of houses that have been proposed there, that this committee has worked its way through, that various councillors asked questions about over a number of years, and the council has now progressed that to the point that it has. And I just think that, to do anything other than this would be entirely unjustified. There's, in my view, adequate land for development to address all sorts of housing needs across the city and district, and within the city in particular, as this is a city West Bank application, and to address social housing need as well. And of course, to reiterate what others have said, that's a very clear concern of mine. I know the area intimately, and its sustainability actually of further build up of traffic. Chair, this area has an inordinate amount of housing up that hill already, and knowing the area as I do, I just don't see how it could take much more in the way of any traffic without major changes to the infrastructure, which would be beyond the control of this particular applicant. And I'm not convinced, going through the report, that the public transport issues are going to be easily resolved either. And finally, Chair, I genuinely do think that this would create a very undesirable precedent, bearing in mind all of the bits and pieces around the ages here that we could see others then approach this committee with, and our work would never be done. Now, of course, I'm happy to hear them, but there are 9 reasons in front of us already, which I feel are strong enough. And again, the proposal is to accept the officer recommendation.
Agree. Any further comments, members? There's a proposal on the floor that's yet to be seconded.
I'll second it.
Members, we have a proposal to accept officer's recommendation to refuse this application by Councillor Boyd, seconded by Alderman Kerrigan. And before we go to a vote, members, I just want to remind members that it's only those who were present at the predetermination hearing that's eligible to vote. So all those in favour? All those against? Abstentions? So, members, that's 4 for and 3 against, so that application has been refused. Members, we've discussed that one application for almost 2 hours. We're approaching the 2-hour mark. I'm going to propose we take a 5-minute comfort break before we start the second.
Oh, sorry.